Giving your students a survey to gather feedback about your teaching seems like a great idea. And it can be a great idea. But teachers are often encouraged to ask students for feedback about their teaching as if this were unquestionably good advice in every situation. And it is definitely not that. I've been working with teachers for nearly 2 decades to help them maintain, stay sane, and up their game in the classroom. Some of the worst survey-related experiences I've heard involve situations where a teacher gives a survey as a desperation move to try to fix problems in the classroom and then sits down to read the survey answers while their students slowly watch them have a nervous breakdown. The advice I want to share with you today starts with making sure that doesn't happen. And then we'll talk about how to collect student feedback in the way that's most likely to benefit your teaching. The 2 main arguments for collecting student feedback are, first of all, that it can help improve your teaching, and second of all, that it empowers students. That second part always feels to me like it has a little bit of moral baggage attached to it, like the person's saying, what kind of teacher wouldn't want to empower their students? And the answer to that is, maybe you. At least, not right this moment. We often hear that teaching is a position of power, which it certainly is. But teaching is also a position of vulnerability. Teaching can sometimes feel like a less funny version of performing stand-up comedy. No one ever tells stand-up comics to go on stage and say, please everybody, let me know how you think I'm doing up here, all at once if possible. Anytime you're asking for feedback from an entire class full of students, it's worth taking a step back to think about what you're hoping to get out of the experience and whether a survey or questionnaire is the right tool for the job. Here's an example. Let's say there's a class project you've assigned, and on the due date, you find that many students have not turned it in, and those that did turn it in, many of them didn't work very hard on it. So you're feeling very disappointed, and a lot of times at this moment, teachers are tempted to try to figure out what went wrong, which is certainly something you should think about. However, if you now give out an anonymous survey, you are now giving students an incentive to really unload on you on how hard the project was, how unfair the project was, how boring the project was, because you're giving them a little glimmer of hope that if enough people say terrible things about this project, maybe you'll decide not to record the grade. On the flip side, there are definitely times when it's useful to ask students what their experience was like working on a class project. You can even embed that into every major project in your class. This shows you value their opinion and it empowers them, but it doesn't empower them to tell you you shouldn't have assigned a project in the first place. Another time that a survey is usually not the right tool for the job is if it's part of a desperate classroom management makeover attempt in the middle of the school year. That is probably just not a realistic outcome, and it also is likely to lead to more feedback than one person can reasonably process. The next thing to keep in mind is that giving constructive feedback is a skill. People who give feedback as part of their job often go through extensive training on how to do it right. Your students have not attended these trainings, and the average student has not had much practice at this skill. Not only are your students not trained to give feedback, but you are not trained in survey design, which is a whole area of expertise on its own. I have to admit that I went into a little bit of a rabbit hole this morning before recording this video, watching videos about professional survey design advice. And I don't necessarily recommend you go into the same rabbit hole because you have things to do, but professional survey designers know that everything from the order of the questions to how questions are worded can affect the way that people respond. It's just worth knowing that you can't take this for granted. By the way, if you'd like to use the 11-question survey that I used every year with my high school students, you can find that using the link in the description below this video. Here's another thing worth keeping in mind. Most of us have had experiences where one comment sticks in our head and messes with us for way longer than it should. When you give a class survey, you're asking for a lot more than one comment. I'm talking to you as someone who once left my high school students' end-of-year surveys on my kitchen table for a full week unopened. I would just circle around them thinking, today's the day to open these, and then I just wouldn't. And this was after years of confident teaching. This was also in spite of the fact that the year had gone pretty well and I expected mostly positive feedback. It just took me that many full nights of sleep to work up the courage to read whatever my students had to say. Teaching is a relationship-based job. Even the professional parts are intensely personal. It's easy to get overwhelmed by a tidal wave of opinions, especially if there might be some hurtful comments mixed in. Now, of course, you're going to get some positive comments too, probably mostly positive comments. But the negative stuff is what tends to stick with us. Now let's talk about the practical side of how to collect this feedback. Your students deserve privacy and dignity, and they deserve to know that their comments won't be held against them at grading time. One way you can do this with end-of-year surveys and really reassure students that their answers will be private is to have them fold their anonymous surveys in half. Then have a trusted classmate go around and collect them and staple all the way around the edges of the folder so you cannot pull papers out. And then you promise the class that you will not open these folders until your last grade has been submitted for the year. As a related courtesy, you should ask that students not show their answers to each other while they're working. Just explain that this would mess with your head because it's weird to have students talking about you where you can see them, but you don't know what they're saying. One thing about feedback is it's often great for alerting you to a problem, but less great at pointing you toward a solution. What is probably not going to happen from student feedback is that one student gives you some genius answer that makes everything click. Your best case scenario is more likely that you notice a pattern in the answers, and then you give yourself time to think about how to address that pattern. You need both privacy and time to absorb these answers. You want to make sure that you're not in a position where you're going to be expected to make changes right away based on what you've just read. If you can't wait until the end of the year to give out a survey, at least I beg of you, wait until a Friday. And for the love of all that is holy, do not sit down and read a stack of surveys at your desk while students are present. If you'd like a little bit of help processing the answers or figuring out what steps to take next, you can download my free classroom management troubleshooting guide at roxanaeldon.com. You can find that using the link in the description below this video. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found this helpful.